Aloha, my name is Nick Sexton. I'm the guest moderator here today for Likeable Science, our great Friday afternoon show with the normal host, Ethan Allen, but the normal host is our expert today, so he's sitting on the other side of the table. Welcome to your show, Ethan.
Thank you, Nick. Nice to be in the other chair here for a change.
I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this really great publication here, because as we were just talking, you have pretty deep experience in this field of academia, in the world of vision.
Indeed, this was an article that harked back to some work I had done years and years ago as a postdoctoral fellow. And I was studying the phenomenon of visual system plasticity, and that's how the visual system changes based on experience. And back in the 1970s, a team of researchers at guys named David Hubel and Thorsten Wiesel had discovered that animals learn to see, actually. Seeing is not something that just happens. And if you deprive an animal of vision during an early phase of its life, that it will never learn to see as well. And particularly if they would deprive monkeys or kittens of vision in one eye, and that eye would never sort of catch up to the other eye, would never be able to have as good acuity or discriminate things nearly as well. And that phenomena had a short window. There was a critical period when you can cover that eye and cause this effect. If you cover it before that, it doesn't make any difference. If you cover it after, it doesn't make any difference. Once the animal is an adult, you can cover its eye for quite a long while, uncover it, and the eye is fine, it's still seeing just. And so there's this idea developed that there's a critical period to learn to see. And as a result of that, there's been a belief that if you were blind from birth, you probably could never learn to see as an adult, even if you could somehow get your vision back. And this article that was in a recent issue of Science really spoke to that in a very interesting way. Apparently there was an ophthalmologist traveling through India, ran into several young adults who had basically had congenital cataracts, that is cataracts since birth, and had them corrected only as adults. And these people were actually able to see, and he thought this was very strange because it's sort of totally contrary to the theory.
It's a complete different idea than what we've studied in the 1970s with those
exactly
kittens and
yeah. So he started a project called Project Prakash, and has gone around and actually helped thousands of people in India who have visual system problems of various sorts, including several hundred children who had cataracts when they were born and have lived for all their life basically being blind, and they've gone in and surgically corrected these. And it's a fairly simple process. In the US, we think nothing about it. I mean, it's virtually an outpatient process. You go in, the doctor slips in, essentially pulls the lens out of your eye and pops in an artificial lens. Quick and easy.
Just like that, or just, and when you reach your later years, you
because
have a cataract in your eye. And
exactly, we all get cataracts. My ophthalmologist told me my cataracts are slowly developing. She wants to give me to do the cataract surgery at some point, probably the next couple of years.
And just like that, one Wednesday, you're going to go in and you're going to be out that afternoon.
Exactly. It's no big deal. But particularly in areas like rural or remote villages in India, they have no one there to do it. You're a long, long way from any medical process, any medical facility that can do it. There's nobody to sort of diagnose the problem. So kids are born with cataracts, and the parents don't even recognize that there's anything wrong with the kids until the kids are up and starting to toddle around and keep sort of smacking into stuff, and then it becomes clear the kid is not seeing,
So the issue that the child has cataracts is not necessarily something that's clear right off the bat, right? It takes a certain amount of precision, A, to even be able to diagnose the fact that the child is born with cataracts, and B, to go in and correct that.
Right, because they're not super obvious in some cases. The lens is clouded up enough that the child cannot see well, but it's not blatantly obvious to somebody looking at that. Because the lenses are actually fairly small in your eye, so it's not an obvious thing. But it's been very interesting too, because they had presumed there were certain phenomena that we would think about as a learned visual perceptual things. The one called the Ponzo illusion there, where if you, I don't know if we had an image of that, but if you have a set of converging lines, the brain can look at that and interpret that as things going off to the horizon, and it's how, it makes very good sense. It's how our brains think about a three-dimensional world when represented in two-dimensional space. We see points of convergence at the horizon, and therefore if you put horizontal lines on those, one that's further near the horizon will look much bigger, basically, even when the lines are actually the same length. And we've always assumed this was a learned process, but it turns out these people who regain vision from after their cataract surgery instantly see this.
Ponzo illusion just happens right off the bat. It's clearly not a learned.
Right, they have no experience with a three-dimensional world. They haven't learned. It is intriguing that their vision, well, one, it takes a while. When they first learn to take the bandages off, these people just sort of are seeing light, color. They have no sense of what's going on. They can't distinguish objects from one another. And if you think about that, and that makes beautiful sense, right? How could they? They have no understanding of what all this input means, and it's just sort of flooding their nervous system, and indeed the brain activity in the visual system is being very different than the whole visual cortex just sort of pulses, sort of all in sync with itself, and they're just obviously sort of having waves of input washing over them. But then gradually over weeks, they begin to sort things out and begin to say, oh, this is one object, this is another object, this is a face. They can understand what a face is. Which is actually another intriguing phenomenon, that there actually seems to be some sort of innate face recognizer in the brain.
So the brain is day by day, week by week, image by image, slowly categorizing these new images.
Right, and gradually
shapes of light,
its activity becomes more and more normal, that is more and more like somebody who has grown up seeing, and different parts of the visual cortex will activate under different kinds of stimulation, and so it's great. They never gain full normal vision. That is, their visual system has been sort of scarred by the fact that it didn't get good experience when it probably should have early on. Their contrast sensitivity is very, very sort of low, and their acuity is not really great. But nonetheless, they can, as the main character featured in that article, is able to get up and ride his bicycle through a crowded marketplace without any trouble. And so that's,
wow.
I mean, compared to being blind, that's a huge leap.
And how long did that take him to be able to?
That was after several months, apparently.
Skill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's to me that's very interesting stuff. I spent some while when I was back doing research as a postdoctoral fellow, studying this phenomenon of visual system plasticity. And we were sort of taught that this critical period was sort of a firm and inflexible thing, and that it couldn't be overcome. And here, and to me, it's a very pretty example of how science is a very dynamic field. You know, the facts I learned then are being shown to be completely false now.
Yeah, those clear-cut windows of just in one quick study that may have been, initially created by this individual noticing a frequency in these various Indian people who are having cataracts and getting them removed and being able to see again. Those rigid windows of that previous science discovery have quickly begin to warp a little bit.
Yeah, exactly, and it's not like the whole thing has been exactly thrown over, but we now have a much clearer understanding. Here's the image of the Ponzo illusion, where you can see those red lines. That red line further towards the visual horizon appears much longer than the short red line in the front. But if you actually look at them sort of side by side, you'll see those two red lines are actually exactly the same length.
The exact same length, right? But that idea of depth perception.
Right, and then there's another illusion right down below it too, and again, it's always been assumed, but yeah, you can, this Miller-Lyon illusion, which again, that middle line appears longer in that top set, but as you can see clearly in the bottom set, when they actually drop in the scale lines there, basically the lines are all exactly the same length. Again, it's not a learned thing. This is something the visual system picks up on right away.
Interesting. So is that now the brain interpreting this image as an optical illusion, and the brain is thinking that?
Yeah, apparently, right. Apparently, this perception of those lines in the Ponzo illusion as being longer is a very powerful one, that the brain is sort of wired to understand that appearance of three-dimensionality.
So the brain is innately capable of just understanding, depicting the 3D realm for whatever reason.
Yeah, apparently that's sort of at least
Okay.
one simple interpretation of that is that somehow how we are actually, and that would make sense over the millennia of evolution, that you can envision brains would be wired to be very good at navigating the three-dimensional world, since all the animals have had to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's especially surprising in terms of the human example, I think, and that's why this is such an interesting article and study, because, I mean, you know, what I've learned and heard is that, you know, there's plenty of animals who are born and are immediately within 20 minutes running or swimming or doing something that is crucial to them surviving in their environment, and that's not necessarily true with our race or our species, the human species. So that's just surprising that you fix those cataracts, and all of a sudden the human brain is also wired to interact in its environment.
Right, it suggests there's some very deep commonalities in the visual system, but yeah, that does probably, there's a nice tie-in between the sort of precocious animals, as they're called, precocial animals, the ones that are born ready to go. Those are typically prey animals, right?
Yeah.
The antelope and all the young antelope get born and are sort of up and able to run right away, because that's a key survival skill.
Running, right?
Well, their parents cannot essentially protect them against
Yeah.
predators, and their only protection is their speed, versus the so-called altricial animals, animals that are born in a relatively undeveloped state, such as we are, and the marsupials are the classic example, where baby kangaroos are born, you know, 2 inches long, and can only have functional front feet and a mouth, basically, that are, you know, they climb in their mom's pouch, latch onto a teat, and that's it, you know, for a while. So, but all of us apparently share these same kind of issues with our visual system. So,
somewhere deep down in all of our mammal visual systems, there is a innate level of plasticity.
Exactly.
Existing plasticity. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit more.
Right.
Once we come back from break, we'll be back in a minute. This is Likeable Science with Ethan Allen.
Hi, everybody. I'm I.C. Davidson. Thanks for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. One of the things that we try to do here is promote civic engagement. How do we do that? We put on shows weekdays from 12 to 5 p.m. We let people in our world on Facebook and all the social media. Today, I'd like to talk to you about another way that you can engage us here at ThinkTech Hawaii and help us promote civic engagement here in Hawaii. What you do is you get on Twitter, you follow us at ThinkTech HI, and during the day, between weekdays between 12 and 5 p.m., you can interact with each of our live shows. What does that mean? You can send us questions, comments, thoughts, experiences, anything. All you have to do is mention us on Twitter. We'll see it here in the studio, and our hosts and guests will address them accordingly. This is a big thing for us. We want to hear from you. The conversation doesn't start here when our show ends. It ends when everybody gets their say. Join us weekdays, 12 to 5 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com. Join in the conversations live with Twitter, at ThinkTechHI. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your support. See you soon.
Welcome back. I'm here. My name's Nick. I'm the guest moderator today on Likeable Science with the expert and the real host of Likeable Science, Ethan Allen here. We're talking about visual and neuroplasticity in relation to a recent publication in the journal Science about cataracts being removed in India and the ability to see and the ability for our brains to decipher the physical environment around us. So we were just talking more so about the neuroplasticity associated with vision, and maybe you can explain a little bit more as to how our brains are wired, how we learn, and how, as a result, our brains are wired.
Sure. So, you know, we tend to think of our brains as sort of these set structures, but what sometimes people don't appreciate is that your brain is sort of in a very constant dynamic flux, and the neurons in it are growing all the time, sending out new processes, making new connections with other neurons, strengthening those connections, breaking those connections, and all of this changes in a very a very organized pattern, actually, a very complex, but very organized pattern. So for instance, there are sections of your brain where you're interpreting all your so-called somatosensory input, the input from all your skin all over your body. And as you might imagine, your fingertips have a fairly large representation. They're quite sensitive, right? They're overrepresented already. But if, even as an adult now, you were to, say, take up playing the violin, you don't play the violin, right?
I do not.
Right.
It'll be a new skill.
So as you used your right hand to manipulate the strings, and I guess, I gather, I don't play the violin either, but I gather it's a very complex, delicate business on playing it. That in your brain, the area of these fingertips would actually expand. The representation of your fingertips would really actually grow in your brain. New connections would be made, sort of pushing other connections out of the way. Because you're using your fingertips in a new way, you're using them and you're paying a lot more attention to them, you're getting a lot more input into them. And if we think about it, that really makes sense, right? If our brains were really sort of carved in stone, we couldn't learn anything, right? If they were just fixed. I mean, learning is all about change, right?
Definitely, yeah. So those areas of the brain are physically enlarging.
Right.
The neurons and the connections are
right. There's more connections
growing.
Right. There's more connections being
yeah.
made, yeah, and so that representation is physically actually grows in the brain. Wow. And I mean, it is funny. Brain tissue is sort of a valuable commodity, and if it's not being used by one sense, some other sense will take it over. So back to the visual system, they have found that if children have cataracts for some period of time, only a matter of, say, a few months, and get them then taken care of a few months after birth, and then have 20 years of perfectly normal visual experience, their visual cortex still is not normal. Their visual cortex was apparently invaded early by auditory neurons, and their visual cortex will actually, while it is processing vision, also processes sound. And which in a normal person, your visual cortex really doesn't respond to sound particularly at all. And so it's there, it is very interesting that the thing is that you can learn and unlearn, but there's also some wiring that gets sort of fixed.
Yeah. So there's some absolutely crucial elements of our brain makeup that we need to have. Those are never going away. They may ebb and flow, may get smaller or larger in an extreme case, like say you're blind or say you were born with cataracts.
Right, exactly. And then other systems will say, oh, well, here's some unused space basically in the brain where it's not it's not firing in any organized pattern, making sense of anything. So we'll just sort of use this kind of space ourselves. And as you were pointing out earlier, there's been interesting studies done on the cab drivers in London. And in London, they have to learn what's called the knowledge. Cab drivers have to test
They have to learn everything. They get tested on an
yes,
entire
and
set
they must
of those
essentially be
streets,
able, for any of, I think the number is something like 4,000 spots in London, be able to sort of, from any one to any other one, and get between those in the best possible way. And which gives them, if you think about it, it's a tremendously challenging spatial mapping problem, right?
Absolutely, because it's not only spatial, but there's also, numerical information, alphabetical information, names, streets, numbers.
Right, and they've got to be able to process all this, integrate it, sort of think about this in terms of how should I best do this? What are my options? At this time of day, is it going to be better to go one way versus another way? And indeed, parts, particularly the areas of the brain that actually do have to do with processing space and information of how you're maneuvering through the world, those parts of their brains are enlarged. And people who do different things, their brains actually do change over time. People who meditate routinely and spend a lot of time meditating, their brains actually alter. Their brain patterns are altered. Their functioning is altered. And again, this is should not really be surprising, right? We sort of are what we do, right? And that's understandable.
I mean, I think this is some really concrete evidence to the idea that the way in which we spend our time, the way we practice, the things that we do become hardwired into our brain.
Right. And what's sort of amazing about this work is how long there still is how much plasticity, even even after 18 or 20 years of not getting visual input, the brain will still step up and start processing that if given a chance, if suddenly the cataracts are removed and the sort of sensible visual flow starts flowing on in. It was intriguing to me personally because about a year ago I had my eyes straightened. I had my both eyes sort of turned in a bit, the right eye rather strongly, and the right eye had been basically suppressed for all my life. I had very little vision through it. I tended just to pretty much ignore that. And now, and it was almost immediately as soon as I sort of woke up and came out of anesthesia, I was aware of a dimensionality, a three-dimensionality in the world, you know,
wow.
Which I'd never sort of seen before. And it was striking to me how rapidly and how immediately that came on. I was actually, for the first several days, I would just at times be completely overwhelmed by the sensation of sort of the reality of three-dimensional space. I had known that the world was three-dimensional before, but I had never really viscerally sort of experienced it.
Yeah, certainly. So you had grown up without having that sense of the idea that it was a three-dimensional world.
Right.
And as a result of that, you know, how were your actions different, and you know, how did you operate?
You know, I've never been any good at sports that involve small objects moving fast. You know, like baseball. You know, quite frankly, just sort of terrifies me because, you know, I could never make a good judgment about where the ball was hit, where it was coming, how to go after it. Because basically I was not seeing in 3 dimensions at all. And that makes it, you know, without that third dimensionality, a game like baseball becomes a very complex process and a very hard thing to do well. I still don't have in any sense, I think, any normal depth perception, but I have some depth perception now.
But as soon as you had that change happen,
right, so they tweaked my eyes and just straightened them up so the inputs suddenly were more or less matched now. There were apparently neurons in my brain just waiting there, sort of saying, "Oh,
just waiting to experience, right?"
Yeah, good. We got this input now. We'll kick this in, sort of. Yeah.
That is so interesting. Now, and how has that development of those neurons changed since, you know, the time you had the operation to present day? Has it been a very quick sort of development?
No, I have. I had intended to start doing some rigorous practice on developing binocularity. I've not actually had the opportunity to do that, so I haven't pursued that, and so I continually kick myself a little bit about, but I probably actually will go back at some point, and I hope within the next year or so, and start trying to get some regular practice where I'm forced to use my eyes together. And so there are now, for instance, games. There are versions of Tetris, for instance, they'll put on a computer screen where you wear glasses with one red lens and one green lens, and the game is color-coded with the pieces and the falling pieces and the receptacles being different. So you have to use your 2 eyes together to make the game make sense to play it.
Yeah, to be able to
and you can develop stereopsis, binocular vision. You can learn to use your eyes together. And since my eyes are now reasonably well aligned, I should be able to learn that. And it's I'm looking forward to doing this. I believe I can actually develop my binocularity further. But yeah.
Certainly. Well, let's hope that this is this study, and you know, kind of relating it back to your academic study as well as your personal experience, is kind of the jump start to get you playing those sorts of games.
Yeah,
really get you.
I think that's probably why I got so excited when I saw this. Was it really says to me, you can keep changing even on a huge, deep level of no vision to vision again. If your brain can learn that kind of major jump, there's no reason it can't learn a relatively simple thing like making the eyes work together. You know?
Certainly, right? It takes your personal experience and kind of creates very clear boundaries around it when you compare it to living your entire life without sight, as some of these individuals from India have experienced, because it just requires a simple surgery to fix their particular affliction.
Right.
Geez, so the world of neuroplasticity, I'm learning a whole lot from this. That's for sure.
Well, again, the neuroplasticity really does have to happen all the time if you think about it. Indeed, if you think about sort of the medical concept of being brain dead, that sort of says right away, if your brain is not functioning on those levels, you are basically dead. I mean, yes, your heart may still be beating for a while, but fundamentally,
Wow, yeah, I mean, but you were also just mentioning, some phenomena where individuals who are in a coma or in some sort of unconscious state are still experiencing a relative amount of brain activity when it comes to neuroplasticity.
Yes, for years, when people slip into a coma, and after some period of time, that they refer to them as being in a persistent vegetative state. People are completely unresponsive. They won't react to sounds, to sights, to people's voices. And for a long time, it's sort of been assumed these people weren't hearing, weren't seeing, were essentially brain dead. They weren't thinking. And then with the advent a few years ago of a technology called functional magnetic resonance imaging, where they put people in a machine and actually run large magnets around it and watch how your brain is being active, they found that assumption was not necessarily true. So that is, if they asked you to lie on one of these machines and think about playing a game of tennis, you get certain patterns of brain activity. You would envision yourself running back and forth on the court. You'd be planning moves. You'd be planning swinging your arms, hitting the ball. And this would create a very distinct pattern in your brain. And it's a fairly shared pattern. I'd create a pattern pretty similar to yours. Now, a real tennis pro might have a somewhat different pattern because they're probably thinking about it differently and using different...
They'd have more experience using those particular areas of the brain, maybe in more complex
plasticity in action, right.
Yeah.
But what they found was when they took some of these patients who had been in a persistent vegetative state for years and did this, they got exactly the same results. These people apparently could hear and perfectly well envision going out and playing tennis in the same way that you or I could, and could switch when they'd ask them to now envision sweeping the rug. The pattern would shift. And again, it really speaks to some of the new technologies that are enabling us to really begin to understand the brain in fundamentally different ways.
Oh, definitely. I mean, just the idea that we have these new technologies in which we can monitor that sort of brain activity, but we're essentially learning that these innate types of brain activity have always existed in the neuroplasticity of the brain, right? I mean, it doesn't matter who it is, they still have somewhere that wiring that can tell them to walk, to run, to move their arm to the left, move to the right,
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. On that note, we're going to take a quick break. My name's Nick. We're here with Likeable Science, the expert, Ethan Allen, to my left here. We'll be right back after this.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to thank you for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. We are delighted to be partners with ThinkTech because it gives us the opportunity to bring to you a show every week on Monday at 2:00 p.m. called Ehana Kako. Ehana Kako means let's work together because we believe that Hawaii will be a better place when everybody works together. And in what way? Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we research 3 basic areas and we invite guests to come on board from across the country, the state, and the nation to talk about a better economy, a better government, a better society. Now, aren't those things we all want? Indeed. If you'd like to have the latest research in terms of public policy, as well as ways in which we can build a better government, economy, and society, then tune in every Monday on ThinkTech Hawaii at 2:00 p.m. for our fascinating guests on Ehana Kako. Let's work together. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I'll see you then. Aloha.
We're back. I'm the guest moderator. My name is Nick Sexton, moderating today for Likeable Science, the real host of Likeable Science and expert in the world of visual and neuroplasticity. Plasticity. Ethan Allen is sitting right next to me here, and we've been engaged in a really interesting discussion about Ethan's academic and personal experiences with vision and the neuroplasticity in the brain associated with the ability to see, as well as this interesting new article that's been published by Science about the visual plasticity when it comes to individuals who have not been able to see for a long time due to their cataracts. And so Ethan's going to run us through a quick campfire story.
Well,
in this subject?
It was our conversation there got me thinking about a story that I had heard years ago of there's a small animal lives in Europe called the water shrew, and you may know shrews are these little tiny insect-eating animals, sort of mouse-sized animals, quite voracious. In Europe, they have one of these that runs around underwater a good deal of the time. It's called a water shrew. And like many of these insectivores, it doesn't have a very good visual system at all. It has a lot of, it has long whiskers and a very good sense of touch, and maneuvers through its complex environments, rocks, stream beds, etc., by sense of touch. And they move incredibly quickly, incredibly accurately, and are able to leap from one rock to the next and dive under a sunken branch and all that perfectly well. But if you, for instance, move a rock that they're used to leaping onto in their route, move it 2 inches to the side, they will come along, they will leap right to where it used to be and fall and be completely disoriented and have to sort of run around until they get back on a familiar thing. They will come up to it again, leap, and fall again.
Wow.
Because they really aren't very plastic. They aren't really very smart. They have to really learn an environment and believe in its solidity, and it takes them a while to relearn that kind of thing and learn a new route, then get used to the fact that you've moved the rock. The rock's now 2 inches to the left. They have to actually relearn that, learn to jump a different way or learn to go and bypass the rock. It's quite a striking example of, and yet we all do the same thing, right? To some extent, we are all creatures of habit, more or less. Now, some people like their habits, engage in their habits, stick with their habits, make their habits sort of work for them. Other people like to break loose from their habits more, right? There are people who always want to drive exactly the same route to work every time, and they'll always choose the same roads at the same time. There are other people who always want to take a different route and keep trying. Let's take the back roads this time. Let's see if we went off this way and do we gain or lose any time. And to some extent, it has to do with that same kind of phenomenon, right?
No, definitely. So, I mean, that's a great example of how we have this neuroplasticity and we're using a particular brain function to, say, go forward on this path, but then the notion of the built environment and the habitual way in which we, our humans, or the water shrew, is operating within the environment kind of intersects with that normal brain wiring, and
right.
Some play to one more than others, and
yeah,
vice
exactly,
versa.
Exactly. Habits have a real strength, and they're very easy. It means you can do things without engaging a lot of thought processes, right? Which is really good. It makes for quick and efficient decisions. You don't want to, if you were a primate in the brush, say, 3 million years ago, and you heard the brush rustling beside you, you don't have a lot of time to process whether, what you ought to do. You either turn and fight or you run, one of the two.
You'd be like, I'm just going to check it out this time.
You don't want to sort of sit there and scratch your head and think, I wonder what I should do, because you'll probably be eaten or you'll miss a chance to secure a mate or whatever. But for us, it really does tie into our lifestyles, and particularly as people age, people tend to be more comfortable with their patterns and their habits than younger people. And that can have deleterious effects. You begin to cut down on your new experiences. You cut down on your sort of opportunities to experience new things. You limit sort of opportunities for learning. And there is increasing evidence actually for people that older people who stay more mentally active, who challenge themselves by going out, pushing themselves to do new things, learn a new language, learn computer skills, take up a new sport. These people do better cognitively as they age, because they are sort of pushing themselves and they're sort of keeping the plasticity muscle, as it were, exercised.
Yeah, right. In a sense, they're increasing a particular area of their brain's wiring.
Or usually actually several, because I mean, even something like learning a new language, that there's the listening to the sounds of the new language, processing it cognitively, verbalizing, vocalizing it back. I mean, those are all very different parts of your brain, and getting all those connections built is a very challenging process. And yeah, it's hard, but it's probably actually has great payoff.
And I would imagine that sort of rewiring of a brain is something that's going to keep. I mean, I'm thinking about, you know, other areas of the body where plasticity and flexibility often leads to, you know, longevity,
Right.
and increased blood flow, you know, all sorts of positive effects.
Sure. I mean, again, if you get, for instance, stuck in a hospital and are lying flat on your back for a few weeks, you're going to find it very hard the first time you get out of bed to do more than walk a few steps. I mean, even that quickly, your body will sort of adjust to this very sort of non-challenging environment and sort of give up a lot of its stuff. Whereas if every day you're out there practicing rock climbing, clambering over rough terrain, you know, walking a few steps is nothing. You know, it's no challenge at all. So in the same kind of way, giving yourself constant new cognitive challenges is a way to keep yourself flexible, keep yourself exercised mentally, and prevent some of that decline that you might otherwise see.
And that's just, you know, something that should be practiced from age 2 to age 98, right?
Exactly,
Because,
exactly.
like we've been learning that the ability for neuroplasticity to develop is consistent throughout
Right.
one's entire life cycle.
Yeah, there are different periods, and clearly you can learn different things. I discussed it in one of my earlier science campfire stories. Is about the peacock who grew up with the giant tortoises in the zoo at one point and had no other peacocks around. And because he was exposed in early life to just the giant tortoises as sort of the only other life forms around, his mate choice was permanently screwed up. And later on, they presented him with peafowl, and he wanted nothing to do with it. He was determined that the tortoises were his folks, you know, his peeps, you know, and that's who he was going to hang out with, and that was never going to alter. You know, there was something fundamental, a switch basically got thrown there for him.
That was more in the area of his brain development rather than.
Right. And so yeah, there's always this balance between sort of fixed innate stuff, plastic things, and when windows may open and close on plasticity. And by getting back to this article, it shows that some of the windows that we thought closed much quicker are actually, there's at least cracks in them, you know, for some while.
There's at least always an opportunity for change, right?
Right.
Okay.
And that's very much what we all, you know, sort of is the big challenge in life, is to keep learning, right? Because the day you stop learning is the day you start dying, basically. So it's how you choose to do that, of course, is that individual decision of what makes us all unique, you know.
It really speaks to the way in which you spend your time, is the way in which your brain is developing, and probably the way in which your health, both your physical and your cognitive health, is going to go as well, too, right? So I think this article is a great example, just to kind of really send out that idea that, you know, you need to be challenging yourself cognitively, because there are all sorts of repercussions.
Yeah. Just as, again, you should challenge yourself physically. And if you choose to stop exercising and become a couch potato within, you know, a few weeks, a few months, a few years, your body will have adjusted to a great extent, and yes, you will probably have gained weight, lost fitness, lost flexibility, lost aerobic capacity. You know, whereas if you get out there every day and walk or run or do some exercise and things that'll keep you active, your body will stay much more able to do all those things. And oddly, that doesn't stop you from being a couch potato. You can still relax on the couch perfectly well. So it's not exactly balanced, but yeah, and it's, you know, it's something we all should be keeping in mind, particularly as we get older, is how do you preserve the quality of your life? And part of that is preserving your options, preserving your cognitive abilities, preserving your physical abilities, because losing any of those things can be terrible, you know. And they certainly can be lost. There was a classic example of sort of the loss was a patient, a famous neurological patient known for years, but his initials HM, who had a brain operation done that knocked out his ability to form new memories. And this guy was a perfectly bright, articulate person and could chat perfectly well still after this. He recovered completely from the operation. He could talk about his childhood. He could converse perfectly normally, but he fundamentally could not learn anything new. So his doctors, even though he was seeing these same doctors for years, virtually every day for him it was like, oh, hi, and
Yeah.
brand new
Hello,
person.
who are you again?
Yeah, right. He could no longer consolidate new memories because of the surgery that had been done on him, and it was a very, he recently passed away actually, and they well, no one's happy about this, but they were happy to have his brain actually to look at this and sort of see exactly where.
Yeah, to understand the phenomena a little bit more, right? Wow, well, that's definitely speaks a lot to the just what it means to have a fixed, neural makeup, right?
Yeah, again, if you can't change your brain in that way, you're not going to learn anything new. And he was the classic case of that. So,
wow, well, too interesting. Well, thank you so much, Ethan. I've certainly learned a lot
it's been a
about vision, about the brain, neuroplasticity. Really appreciate spending this time with you, and thanks a bunch.
I appreciate your stepping up and being the host here. Good to see you.
Wonderful time, Ethan.
All right.
Once again, this is Likeable Science. My name's Nick. I'm the guest moderator. The real host is the guest today, Ethan Allen, speaking on vision and neuroplasticity.